For years, Republicans in Washington promised to cut government spending if their party won the White House. But for the second straight year, Republican President Donald Trump's done just the opposite.
We will build, we will maintain, and the vast majority of Americans want to see us take care of our infrastructure.
On Monday, Trump presented his 2019 budget proposal, giving the world a hard look at his administration's spending priorities. They include a proposal for $1.5 trillion to rebuild roads, bridges, and airports, and $686 billion for the U.S. military, a 13% increase from the previous year. Trump's proposal also reduces the State Department budget by $9 billion, or 26%. That decrease includes the elimination of a program promoting climate change.
We have spent $7 trillion in the Middle East. $7 trillion. What a mistake.
As with his 2018 plan, Trump has again proposed cuts to humanitarian and economic aid. Last December, he threatened to link foreign assistance to support for U.S. measures at the United Nations, like recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. But when it comes to foreign spending, Congress largely ignored Trump's last budget proposal and is expected to do the same for 2019. Last week, the U.S. Congress approved its own two-year spending deal that the president signed into law, keeping the government open with boosts to defense and domestic spending. That congressional deal essentially overrides the budgets released by the White House.
The president has merely, when it comes to the budget, the power to propose, but it is Congress that appropriates and decides, and Congress decided and appropriated last week.
But what is consistent about both proposals is unrestrained spending. Trump's budget projects a deficit of more than $1 trillion, with no plan for reducing America's spiraling debt. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Seeking an honest budget, oh my. President Trump sending a proposal to Congress today, but my next guest says we need a new kind of budget. In his Wall Street Journal op-ed titled "An Honest Federal Budget Would Help Control Spending and Debt," here now is Glenn Hubbard, Columbia Business School dean, former chairman of the U.S. Council on Economic Advisors under George W. Bush. You have a bold proposal in here. You say that each year's total federal spending should be limited to the average annual inflation-adjusted revenue of the previous 7 years. A limit? No.
Well, I'm not sure it's so bold. It's actually pretty simple in that normally in a family or a business, we think about paying for ordinary operations out of current income.
Right.
The government might well want to do that. Ordinary operations also includes transfer payments, though, and that's the real problem in the budget. Without some kind of mechanism or rule, I don't see the process working.
Yeah, but a rule like that, it would be such a shock to the system right now.
Well, it would be, which is why it's not going to happen tomorrow. But what could happen tomorrow is more information to the public. What really is the debt of the country? What is the true deficit the country has? And putting out reports. There are governments like Canada and Sweden that have done a much better job in recent years than we have.
Well, yeah, because the popular thinking, or at least the propaganda, is debts and deficits don't matter. And people have become, I think, numb and immune to the idea. You always hear our government is spending so much, we're spending our children's money. But it doesn't seem to, on the list of things that people get upset about, this is really low.
I agree, but it shouldn't be.
Why? How do they feel it today?
Basically, as a country, if we want to continue to grow, and I give the president a lot of credit for resetting expectations there, but if we want to continue that and we want to defend the nation, build infrastructure, educate our kids, we're going to have different budget choices. Talking about trillions is no way to talk to the public, but talking about what future taxes would have to be to pay for this is a better way.
We all know that the only way to get spending under control, it's about entitlements. That without doing work on that, it's really just sort of silly. What's a way to tackle that would be palatable to these people in Washington who are very concerned about keeping their job? They don't want to be the one to say, we've got to cut, and, in order for some future benefit. They're like, I'll be out of Congress by then. What do I care?
Well, it's a three-step process. First is telling the public the truth. What really is the deficit in debt, not the on-budget part, but the total. The second would be to say if we increase entitlement promises in a year, put that on the budget so that politicians have to go home and say, you know what, we're going to have to raise taxes or cut other spending, and then finally move to some sort of rule. And we have that, by the way, for much of the budget, just not for the part that counts.
So if we went to, I mean, if we made changes like people have talked about taking Social Security and either means testing it or raising the age, would that make a significant dent if we started to make those kind of changes?
It certainly would. If we raise the retirement age gradually and then cut the growth of benefits for more affluent people, that would help a lot. Same in Medicare. But right now, there's nothing that forces political leaders to make that choice. We have to have a way to force them to do it.
Well, they're not going to force themselves to do it. I mean, they're the ones that write the laws, so.
That's true, but that's why you start with information. This is a problem for all of us, for voters. If voters know the truth, they see the numbers and see the consequences. Like, do we want to be Europe on defense? Do we not want to take care of our children and education? That's what's at stake.
I think they're saying, like, I'm having a hard enough time staying on my budget at home. I got to worry about these chuckleheads in Washington, too, and limit them. You know what I mean? It's like 2 headaches.
I'm afraid it's 2 headaches.
Yeah.
But if we don't fix it, a headache can turn into something worse.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We begin with President Trump's $4.4 trillion budget proposal, and what many are saying lacks fiscal responsibility amid skyrocketing national debt, although the White House does not see it that way.
The budget reduces the deficit by over $3 trillion. This budget not only funds the president's priorities, but puts the country on a path to restoring fiscal discipline.
Let's bring in our panel to discuss. Peter Marisi, University of Maryland economist, Gary Kaltbaum, president of Kaltbaum Capital Management, and Ford O'Connell, Civic Forum PAC chairman. Gentlemen, this is what I'm calling Trumponomics, the use of deficit spending, not unlike what Ronald Reagan did. And Peter, I think here's the point. As much as Republicans talk about curbing spending and the debt, they don't have the political will to do it. This is the hand President Trump has been dealt. And I think as long as he cuts taxes and reduces regulations, he can make more with it than many people suspect.
Well, they don't have the votes to cut spending. They don't have the votes to cut entitlement. They simply don't. Even on health care reform, they couldn't muster 51 votes because several Republicans are really very liberal. The reality is 80 to 90% of the caucus would likely go along with trimming entitlements, reforms of various kinds, to make room for defense spending. But they need Democratic votes. And without those Democratic votes, they simply have to increase spending to get anything done.
Gary, are you concerned about this? I know we're all fiscal conservatives. None of us have to run for re-election. We know it's the third rail in politics, but I think Trump is going to make the best of this. And this is the hand he's been dealt. But many people are thinking, hey, you know what? This White House has veered off course here.
Well, let's be clear. This has been all inherited. But keep in mind, we're at $4.4 trillion next year. We're 4.1 this year. We were 3.8 last year. And we're heading to $5 trillion a year. And every one of those dimes comes out of the economy, comes out of the taxpayer, and that's my worry going forward. We've talked about this for years, Charles, about it being headwinds for the economy, and all I know is it's getting worse, it's getting worse, and it's getting worse. And I know about the tax cuts, and I know about a lot of great things the president's doing economically, but this in the long run, look out. And I said this weekend to you, Charles, $400 billion next year. The first $400 billion of taxpayer dollars is going towards interest payments, not to the poor and or the indigent or to roads or bridges. Right. And then it's going to be $700 billion in 3 years. So the trajectory is a horror show, and somebody one day better start doing something about it or else.
Ford, I see you not yet. Before I let you in, I want to let the audience know that Ronald Reagan, when he came in office, he inherited a tough financial situation. And GDP, deficit spending as a percentage of GDP was 3.8% or significantly higher. And during a 4-year period, he averaged GDP growth that you have on your screen of almost 4%. So can they coexist, particularly in a position where President Trump, Ford, says he wants to ignite this economy because we have been in the doldrums. We haven't had 3% GDP since 2005.
Well, look, I think you're absolutely right. In the short run, yes, I do think it can coexist, and you're absolutely right. He is playing the hand he's been dealt. He's trying to leverage the debt to grow the economy. And let me say this, and he's also ticking off many items in the budget that they promised on the campaign trail, whether it's the VA, opioids, southern border wall. The White House sees this as an economic blueprint for certainty. But going forward, I do agree with Peter and I do agree with Gary. There's not the political will in Washington to do what needs to be done, and that is 70% of our spending is servicing the debt, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. And unfortunately, all three programs are a Ponzi scheme, and we've overpromised people. And until Washington wants to raise the eligibility age on those programs and put in work requirements on Medicaid, guess what? We are in deep trouble. We are basically robbing Peter and his grandkids to pay Paul in the here and now.
So Peter, before we get to your grandkids, the here and now, how will this economy look? How can this economy look? Can we still achieve near-term growth? And can that near-term growth ultimately whittle away at debt? In other words, supply-side economics, can it work?
Oh, I think we can grow more rapidly than we have. The question is it going to be 3% or 4%? And a lot will depend on things like regulatory reform with regard to infrastructure and so forth. If we get the regulatory reform and we maybe get some trade reform, then I think we can grow at 4%. We can have Ronald Reagan's economy. We haven't forgotten how to grow. We've just had a government until now that didn't believe in growth. And we have lots of economists in academic institutions who vote Democratic who are very happy to publish papers that deny basic economics and say we can't grow that fast. We can grow at 4%. It'll be a neat trick to see him do it, and it'll largely hinge not so much on spending, because we have plenty of that now,
right,
but whether they really can get the regulatory reform, as they outlined, for example, today in their infrastructure plan, that they need.
Right. And Gary, speaking of infrastructure, a lot of these infrastructure-related stocks had great sessions, whether it was Caterpillar, U.S. Steel. But the numbers, do they work for you? Can the government just put in $200 billion and get a $1.5 trillion plan out of that?
You can't fit a 10-pound salami in a 5-pound bag the way I see it. Look, it is good news that we're going to do something about infrastructure, but again, hopefully there's some private-public partnerships, because going in debt, you know, we heard the words leveraging debt. Those are not two good words. Leveraging debt, this leads to more debt and more debt and more debt. And let me just say one other thing. The last year, the Clinton administration, we spent $1.8 trillion. We're now at 4.4, headed to 5. I'm still trying to figure out where all this money is going to. And I do know about entitlements, but it's an election year, so that's not going to get done. I am just hoping somebody has the you-know-whats next year to stand up and yell and scream that if we don't change the trajectory of the entitlements, one day, and I mean this, there is a debt bomb out there, and I don't know what day it is, I don't know what number it is, but it's out there, and it's going to blow up eventually.
The clock is ticking. We all can hear the clock ticking, by the way. I do want to let the audience hear what President Trump had to say today with respect to infrastructure spending.
This is a common sense and bipartisan plan that every member of Congress should support. I look forward to working with them, and we're going to get the American people roads that are fixed and bridges that are fixed. And if for any reason they don't want to support it, hey, that's going to be up to them.
Ford, what are your thoughts?
Look, I like where the plan's headed, and I like the basic outline. Here's what the Democrats misrepresent on Capitol Hill, and that is currently infrastructure, only 14% of it is funded by the federal government, and 86% of it is funded either at the local, state, or in private partnership situation. I think we can do this. I think there's the way to go. And one thing I would point out as a model of infrastructure going forward in sort of a rural area that brings goods and services to market is I look at the Hardy Toll Road in Houston, Texas, which has been nothing beyond a success and has paid for itself over time. We should have the users be paying for the infrastructure and the federal government deciding and sort of curtailing people to go in that right direction to support it.